Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Please note, due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed, with the content being designed for an adult audience for educational purposes in order to protect children from harm. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, thanks for joining us back here, and today we'll be picking straight up from our last episode where we spoke to Detective Sargent Harvey Ahern from the Avon and Somerset Police's ICAT, the Internet Child Abuse Team, or ICAT for short. If you haven't heard part one yet, I do recommend you go back and listen to the episode first before listening to this one, as in the first episode, we talked about the role of the ICAT team and the risks posed to children online. In today's episode, we continue discussing with Harvey the work that he and his team undertake, as well as the challenges posed from new technologies, as well as the complexities of working within a global network of policing and child protection, and the difficult realities that he and his officers face. In terms of the work that your team is involved in, where would you say that you are sort of alerted? And obviously you can't talk about details here, but where would you sort of typically say you'd become aware of abuse that's taken place? Is it mainly through those sort of internet social media companies? Is it mainly through victims reporting when they become aware of something? Is it some sort of something that is proactively kind of sought out and found, or bit of a mix? To say, obviously you can't talk about details, but sort of typically where would that you sort of see that coming into you?
There's a wide range of places, as you say, that we would get in. It is a good mix of sources that come into the office, and that will come from social media applications, self-reporting people who are engaged in conversations that they find uncomfortable, where it seems to indicate that a minor is being approached by perhaps an adult account for illegal content, and they will share that information with us and provide us with some extracts of the conversation, perhaps for us to identify people who are engaged in grooming behaviour. Other sources include, of course, people reporting it. We've had quite a small amount of parents who have come into the police station or have reported online to say, actually, my child has been in communication with someone. I found all of this stuff on their mobile phone. I'm not happy with it. Please come and have a look at this for us. And we've had some successful results off of that as well. And then, of course, we do have the undercover side of things where, the police do have a response. They will be in certain places on certain websites where you're not going to know who we are. And we will get referrals in that nature as well. I think I'm able to talk about that because I think people generally know that there are paedophile hunters out there that do exist. And then there are the professional side of it that we run as well with our partner agencies. So we do get a lot of referrals from them as well, and they are very good at that. So I would say be careful.
but rightly so. And,
Yes.
It's in the same way, I would see it in the same way, if you know that there is a lot of street crime, for example, taking place in a certain area, good policing is to monitor that area, is to keep an eye on it, add in extra resources into that area. So actually, if we're not doing that online, then actually we're not policing effectively.
It properly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if there are forums, if there are websites, if there are things taking place that we are aware, activities taking, surely, good policing and ethics is that we have eyes on in that.
Yeah, absolutely. There shouldn't be an offline public space that the police don't have, ability to have a presence in if it's needed. There shouldn't be an online public space where the police shouldn't be able to have a presence where it's needed as well. You're absolutely right.
While we're talking about sort of the internet and internet safety, I'm aware that we are sort of just on the cusp of the Internet Safety Act sort of coming in. I'm sure that's kind of been high on your, and it's been 4.5 years now. It's been sort of bounding around as the bill and kind of different incarnations of it, but we're kind of almost there with it becoming implemented. And could you kind of explain, if anybody's not aware of it, kind of what the Internet Safety Act, as it is now, actually is, or kind of broadly, and sort of how that affects the work you do?
So broadly, the large part of the online safety bill is more to do with how social media companies regulate content on their own platforms, harmful content, harmful speech and behaviors online, which are detrimental to children and adults alike. And it establishes requirements of social media companies, if they wish to operate in the UK, to have some sort of codified way of removing harmful content online and removing illegal content from their platforms, as we've just discussed, that's on there. And it establishes an authority within the UK, which is, for now, I believe that it's Ofcom, who can inspect and make senior managers, which I thought is a novel thing to see in these platforms, liable. So not just the company, but a particular person of responsibility can be liable for prosecution and fines and so on and so forth by Ofcom going in there and saying, actually, this is not satisfactory, and they will give notices. They're empowered to give notices that perhaps their requirements for improvement are need to be made at these companies, and then there's enforcement powers behind that as well. So that's the large part of it, is getting social media companies to take things on their platform seriously, and providing some kind of authority, some agency that can actually officially monitor that and officially take action. And I'm very much in agreement with removing this kind of content from the platforms, and social media companies that perhaps are more lax about doing that, getting them to get themselves in gear to remove illegal content from their platforms, because it can be a bit of a menace with some image sharing platforms which allow you to delete certain images after a certain period of time that will remain nameless. Yep. And we are seeing some good responses. I have seen, we spoke about Twitter before, and I think since it became X, we've actually seen an uptick in a lot of referrals from that being sent towards us. I think I know that Mr. Musk is perhaps a bit different than the previous owners of it, but I can say that I've seen more referrals from X since that's happened. But I definitely agree with the need to get something codified in place, because at the minute it's kind of all left up to companies, independent private companies, to police themselves and police their own content. Well, actually now there's a public body that can say this is unacceptable and you need to be doing something about it, which I think is great. And then going further down to that legislation, I mean, there are several new offences that are created, which includes sending flashing images to people who suffer from epilepsy, which I think it's not something that I ever heard of, and I was quite surprised about that was a thing that existed. So when I saw it in the
presumably
bill,
sort of intentionally,
to intentionally set off some kind of seizure, and when I saw that, I was like, wow, I didn't realise that was a huge problem, but it's big enough for people to.
Makes a lot of sense to include. I know, again,
absolutely.
nothing that I'd have thought about before, but it makes a lot of sense. Because again, if you're intentionally doing something to harm somebody, then and it is the intent that matters, I think. So when we see, there's another offence in there of false communications, which is going to replace Section 127 of the Malicious Communications Act, which was grossly offensive statements made online. And that also contains an element of publishing false information in order to cause someone harassment and distress and alarm. And with the advent of fake news, as they say now, I can certainly see why that's something that they would like to bring in. And then, of course, something that's more relevant for us will be the cyber flashing side of things. And that it's yet to see how that will play out in our team. It will be an interesting one to try and prosecute, because of course you then have to think, well, we're going back into the younger people again, who will send perhaps silly images to someone else as maybe what they think is a joke, but actually causes somebody a lot of distress, and they will have to really think about that. So we'll see. And you're kind of on the forefront of kind of societal development, I guess. Not without wanting to put it too grandiose, but I suppose you are. Technology is massively evolving, and in a minute, if it's okay, we'll talk about those kind of future developments of technology and how that might impact what you do. But also, I guess alongside that, like say, new legislation coming in. So, which is always tricky, isn't it? If the legislation's passed, but quite often it's only once it gets to the courts and becomes case law. That's when it really starts coming into kind of being.
You've got a nervous CPS lawyer who has to charge a brand new offence that they've never dealt with before. And we'll see if there's one that's brave enough to give cyber flashing a go at some point. I anticipate that cyber flashing in the line of work that we do will probably be something that's quite limited in scope, especially when you think about that perhaps the things that we deal with will fall into the more serious categories of perhaps the Sexual Offences Act 2003, which still contains the higher level offences of arranging or facilitating child sexual exploitation offences, things like that. So that's a lot of where we will land. And we'll, as the police, when we find offenders like this, we'll always press for the maximum and the maximum charges that accurately reflect the danger that we think these people and the information that is presented to us. I imagine a lot of our charges will still come under existing legislation, but it is another tool in the bank that perhaps we can use. One of the more interesting ones I found in the online safety bill when I was doing my research on it is the harmful content about suicide and self-harm, and how that's going to shortly be criminalized, sending that across the internet to people to try and encourage them to do it as well. And that's a really horrible thing to think about. But when you think in the context of cyberbullying and perhaps what goes on and gets shared around school, it's actually something that I saw when I was at school that was going around, people sharing this shock content online and just being generally really mean to each other in high school.
Yeah, kids can be horrible.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
And like the impact on somebody's life, especially if they end up going on to do that carry out that self-harm or, eventually take their own life in the most awful of circumstances. Actually, I'm quite pleased to see that there's going to be some legislation in there that will actually allow us to take action on these people, because it just seems like you can cause so much damage to somebody's life and just get completely away with it. Well, actually, now there's something there.
Yeah, I think societal norms and values need to sort of catch up with this, because there are sort of some things that people go, well, it's just it came out in the Ofsted National Review into sexual abuse and harassment in schools, that sort of that culture of misogyny, but also that culture of just kind of accepted behaviours, like cyber flashing, like bullying, harassment, which, like you say, actually can be quite extreme, and that sort of thought of that's the real world, that's the online world, they're two separate things is certainly not the case anymore. Yeah. And that idea we can leave it at the school gates and go home is not there. No. But actually, if we had somebody walking down the high street who was exposing themselves,
we probably deal with that quite quickly.
But also, likewise, if somebody was verbally saying to somebody, you should kill yourself, you should do this, your life's worthless, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Actually, that will be taken quite serious. So I think we need to sort of catch up as a society to see actually that there isn't a difference here. It's just a different way of communicating these things.
And it's a more pervasive way. And as you said, it will, if it follow you to the workplace, it'll follow you home, it'll follow you at school. There's no way they can't reach you. You can try blocking these accounts. They'll make new ones. They'll come after you that way. It's just, I'm surprised that it hasn't been dealt with quicker than this legislation, but I am pleased to see it.
We will see when it finally comes in, sort of what impact it has. To be interesting. And I think the other area with that, sort of as we sort of touched on slightly there, was the future and the future developments, and technology is rapidly developing. Yes. And particularly more recently in terms of AI, but also that ability to access software in your own home, quite technical stuff, doing things, even on your mobile phone now, being able to kind of manipulate images and things. But so are you seeing more of that starting to come through now?
It's coming. It is coming. On my desk, I've so far probably been made aware of one that has involved a lot of AI images of children. It's currently dealt with under the existing legislation. Those images, although they are pseudo images, are well covered by existing criminality. But it is going to be a growing area. It is going to be something that as more people become aware of the technology that is out there, that they will go, ooh, I can use this. And it won't actually require me to go and put myself at risk by contacting someone else, by asking someone to share images with me, by having to reach out to someone who might be a vigilante group, perhaps like that, putting myself at risk. What I can do is I can just download this app and I can have access to thousands of images that I'll just generate for myself. And I can just sit at home and do that. And you're quite right. The technology is there for somebody using a mobile phone. I could pull my mobile phone out of my pocket now, and there's enough power in that as what it is like essentially a PC to download an AI image generating app and The ones that are available on the App Store perhaps might have some more limitations on them where they won't create those images for you, but it's all open source material, which means the code for those particular applications is all shared online and people can generate their own unscrupulous ones that will generate those images for you. Currently, I've seen in our training images which look indistinguishable. Indistinguishable. We went and had some training only the other week where they showed us some AI images, and I embarrassingly managed to get some of them wrong when they were asking us which one they think is a real child. And I selected about 3 that I thought, oh, that looks like a real child. That looks like a real child. That one there. And then they said, well, actually, there's only one.
Right.
That's real in this whole thing. And
that must be a huge challenge for you and your team to because I presume part of the early work you may be doing, if you're becoming aware of abuse, I would presume initially trying to establish who is the victim here, what are the circumstances, how do we kind of start putting those pieces of the jigsaw together? So I guess now it adds that additional layer of actually, is this a real person?
Yeah.
Or not?
Absolutely.
Does that make, would that, and I know we're very early days with this, but does that make, or can you see it making much of an impact about how you respond to images that you see?
I think so. I think as this becomes more, you're quite right. Quite frankly, right now, there is no automatic way of discerning what real images from AI generated images of children where they are made to look so realistic. There's no system out there that goes, this is AI, this is real. It's all done by officer observations and having to have a look at these images and just pick out minute details in the AI generated images which don't look quite right. Can't really do fingers very well at the minute, so we can usually go, oh, that hand has got like 7 fingers on it, so of course it's going to be an AI image, and suddenly the risk goes down. But it will have an effect on our way of prioritizing risk, certainly, and which jobs we are going to be dealing with first. Because if we can't match those images to one that we already know about, so we know that it's perhaps not a first generation image, which is an image which has been created by somebody taking a picture that we've never seen before, which is a good indicator of somebody committing live child contact offences, things like that, which obviously puts them right to the top of our list to go and get them as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
And if we've got thousands of people out there generating thousands of images we've never seen before, which all look photorealistic, how on earth are we going to be able to prioritize which people we go for first? How are we going to be able to know whether or not there is someone in that house with access to children who's taken a photo and is committing contact offences versus someone who's got a mobile phone in their pocket and has generated 1,000 indecent images which they've distributed online?
Within seconds?
Within seconds. And if that becomes very widely known by the people, as it will do at some point, how we're going to cope with the tidal wave of reports that come to us, I don't know.
No.
10 people in an office are not going to be able to deal with that.
It is incredibly complex, isn't it? And like you say, at this point in time, sometimes you can distinguish those images that are AI generated. Sometimes you can't from just what you were saying. But again, we're very, very early on in this technology. And I'm only really, in the last 12 months, it's become sort of more publicly available with things like ChatGPT and what have you. But we're only a year into it, and we know that these things, there's that exponential kind of development of these things as more technologies evolve. It allows more technology to evolve quicker, and only within the scope of a year. Like you say, on your phone, you can pop in, I want to see a pixie flying over a rainbow with a rhinoceros on their head, and it'll generate it for you. But we're only just on your phone in your pocket. So, where we'll be in a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time is
I think
a whole new world, isn't it?
I think it's going to have to start with people being honest about the police's capabilities in this scenario. And I think only by being honest and saying, actually, this could be a much bigger problem than we are actually capable of dealing with as a force, will encourage somebody, hopefully, to make some kind of software that is able to distinguish and able to detect it. Because by being honest, we'll encourage that ingenuity in people to be like, well, actually, we need to generate something that stops this. And it is quite a scary prospect. And I feel that by saying it now, when it comes 5 years, 10 years down the line, and people try and say, oh, we had no idea this was going to happen. Well, actually, you did.
Yeah.
And we've been saying
it's here,
about
it's
it.
now.
Yeah, it's here and now. And we need to start moving on it and get ahead of it before it gets ahead of us.
I have to say, I don't envy the task that you do at all. And I have to say as well, when you think about the reality of the work that you and your team do, I can't imagine how horrendous that must have to be. And it's, I have to say, I completely take my hat off to yourself, to your team, to officers in similar roles right the way across the country, because obviously in order to establish whether a crime has been committed or not, someone needs to see these images.
Yeah.
Someone needs to watch these videos.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that must be like on a daily basis, having to see that as a parent myself. It is certainly something I'd never ever want to see. I mean, how do you and the team sort of, how do you cope with that? And I guess part of it is about that risk, like we talked about earlier, that risk of desensitization around it, but also that the trauma or the risk of trauma for officers having to watch that must be really, really strong. Are you able to talk about sort of any of the support that's put in place for officers who need to do that work?
Yeah, I can talk about the support that is in place. I mean, everybody gets their psychological support sessions, and we are supposed to have 2 a year. And I have to be brutally honest and say that is sometimes not always the case. People are far too busy, and there's far too many other officers that need the services that are provided by the police to adequately have 2 people, 2 sessions per year to make sure that people are doing okay. It's my role as the manager largely to make sure that I'm aware of the team, their personal lives, having that conversation with them. Are you okay? How is it going? And really, being friendly and approachable to be able to pick up someone's looking at something that actually needs a break, and they need a break from work, perhaps. And of course, we have our occupational health team, things like that. It's very standard. Every workplace has occupational health services, and we have access to sort of like therapy sessions, counseling sessions that we signpost people to. And I think being able to disclose to your GP, look, this is the stuff I have to look at work, you will hopefully be prioritized by the NHS as well.
Right.
But there isn't an overwhelming amount of support that is available to us. Usually, if we will know very quickly if someone is going to not be suitable for this department. We're very upfront about what we look at. No one, when they join the department, is under any illusion that they will not have to look at disturbing, traumatic content. And usually people who put themselves forward for this position are already in a position where they mentally know that they can probably handle that quite well. Certainly when I was joining the team, it was something like when I dealt with my first Indecent Images job, probably about 5-6 years ago now. I did have that momentary worry. I was thinking, am I going to look at this image? Am I going to be horribly changed by this? And am I going to come away from this a different person? And actually, sometimes you look at the image and you realize, I am a bit desensitized to some horrible stuff. And that can be genuinely quite helpful to a point, being desensitized, because that's a self-protective factor. That's your protective factor in your brain, having a complete separation from what you're looking at on the screen and what is happening in your life in your home. So I encourage, there's a helpful side to being a little bit desensitized to it. It does become a problem if you're looking at some very serious stuff and you are just out, not taking any of it on board at all. And that's when we need to sort of like look about perhaps getting some support in for this particular officer that's more tailor-made. I'm thankful that on my team that hasn't happened yet. And I'd like to maintain an office that is caring towards our staff members. The staff are what make that place go around. The officers are what make that place go around. If we don't look after them and we don't take care of them, there won't be anybody there. It's easy to go to a GP and say, I can't do this anymore, and you'll be signed off.
Yeah.
And then if that happens too many times, because we're not looking at these people, we'll have a department of empty chairs and no one's going to be dealing with these jobs. So it's really important for me to look after the welfare of my team and make sure that largely they're doing okay as they can be.
Yeah.
But the workload is crushing in the ICAT team at the moment. It has exponentially increased over the years, as we know, and my officers are sort of like going as fast as they can. They're getting up early. They're starting at 4 o'clock. They're starting at 5 o'clock to catch these people before they go to work, before they disappear as an operational requirement. And they're staying until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. We have slept in the office before to deal with somebody who really needed dealing with, and thankfully has now been sentenced to a very long time in prison, because we were all very passionate about getting this person dealt with in the best way, in the most appropriate way. I would like to see more being done for these people who put themselves out there. And often, well, a lot of them are not yet being paid above £40,000 per year. So they're taking on this role, and I would like to see more support for them. I truly would, but it is very busy, very full on, and it can take a toll on your life. And really, it's my responsibility. I take it as my responsibility to make sure that they are looking after themselves, and that if they are putting those long hours, that they are getting the appropriate amount of rest that they need to make sure that they can come into work and not crash their cars, or that they don't just fall apart when they come into the office one day. And it's sort of something that I try and pride myself on. No,
thank you for that. And I know the police have been doing a lot over the last couple of years around trauma-informed practice. I don't know, has that sort of come in some of the work that you've done around that in terms of sort of embedding that within your teams?
Yes. I mean, it's starting off with this sort of the more historical sexual offences side of the work, where we needed to become more trauma-informed to work out the impacts of how trauma really affects someone's memory and personality, so that we can explain that in a better way to the jury and the Crown Prosecution Service, so that when they are meeting someone who has been severely impacted by trauma in their lifestyle, explain perhaps actually some of the reasoning why they haven't reported, for example, in many years, some of the reasoning behind why they might have harmful behaviors in their own life now, because we can actually say, well, actually, it was this trauma that happened so long ago that's been carried with that person. And then as we've come along, we've realized how we can implement it in sort of like the recognizing and understanding the impacts of trauma in our own officers and our colleagues as well. And being able to sort of be watchful for the signs that someone is struggling, someone is quite withdrawn, someone is, not having a good time in the office, and getting ahead of that, again, to give them the support that they need. Yes, looking at some of those images and reading some of the things that these people are saying about children online is horrifying. And certainly in a very recent case that my colleague Ben did a fantastic job on, which was sentenced on Monday. This person was looking to pay for someone to commission offences that were happening in the Philippines, and he was paying about £10 a go for a child to essentially be abused and have that live streamed to him, and he spent upwards of £30,000 on this. I believe it was, or for somewhere around that mark. And when you think of the scale of that harm,
that's what I was thinking. £10 each.
Yes, yeah, and
we're
then
talking about that much money.
You read the kind of content that he wanted to see produced in his emails. It was awful. And that was the one where we had to pull a 24-hour shift to get this guy remanded and in custody straight away.
Are you able to kind of talk about that sort of process with that case? Because you say it's just gone through court, so out in the public domain now.
Yes.
Are you able to kind of talk, how did that sort of come into you in the first place, and what's some of the work that your officers did to investigate that and finally get to the point where there was the prosecution?
Yeah. Well, I have to give credit where it was due. When we say officers, it was one officer who dealt with that.
This Ben.
Ben, yeah.
Ben, if you're listening, fantastic work.
Yeah, hopefully he will. But I have to tell him that he's done a great job, which I'm sure he'll love. But this was one that came into us from a referral from a covert source, which I can't talk about, fortunately. But it's essentially suggested that there was somebody who was seeking to make contact with a child at the time, or thought that they were speaking to a child at the time online about sexual matters. And what they were talking about was quite graphic. So, of course, we go out there and we arrested him in the initial. Seize a lot of devices and take in those computers and laptops and iPads and phones and things like that. And actually, we look at those devices and we go, oh my God, actually, there's a ton of indecent images on here of people who appear to be from Southeast Asian countries. And we start finding various different bits of communication on the phone that seem to suggest that this was being purchased at the suspect's request. So, but what we're missing here is a definitive piece of smoking gun evidence where someone is saying, I want X, Y, and Z to be done, and here's some money for it. And so we decide, actually, between us, we're going to approach some of our friends in more covert units and say, look, can you have a second go at this, please? Because we need to get hold of this evidence. Because he was, initially, when we arrested him, he was bailed out.
Right.
Because the evidence wasn't up together just yet. And there was still more investigation to be done around these devices. So, lawfully, we couldn't hold him. And then they do manage to get in contact with him. And they do manage to set up and organize a purchase from him. Right. And of course, he believes he's purchasing content from a genuine person in the Philippines of a child, and makes the most horrific requests in these emails that he was sending across, these communication of things that I wouldn't describe on this podcast for the sake of the listeners. And that was at the point, and then he sent the payment for it, and that was the point where we finally had this bang. This is all the evidence that we need to show that you were curating all of this stuff that was on your phone. You were asking for it and commissioning it, essentially.
Because that's the thing, even though sometimes it can be really blooming obvious what somebody is doing.
Yeah,
there's always that kind of defense in court of like, well, no, I didn't actually mean it.
Yeah,
wasn't actually going to do it.
Yeah,
but like I say, when you've got that payment, that's the point. It's like, there we go. It's black and white.
Yeah. So went out and we arrested him again for offences and brought him in and kept him in. I mean, we did a lot of work on that job. It was when we go to the CPS and we ask someone to remand somebody, as in deny them bail and keep them in prison because we think there's such a danger to them, the process is very long. We arrested this person in early hours of the morning and then had to transport him from where he was in Wales, I believe, over to us so that we could effectively deal with him. There was then the second interview that had to take place, and then booking him into custody, getting the CPS, getting the lawyer to come out and represent him, which all delays. So eventually we're sort of at the approach now where we have to prepare this big file to send across to the CPS in order to obtain a charging decision. And because there's a massive amount of information here, there's all of the telecommunications data, all of the financial data, all of the data from the original communication, and then the subsequent communication where we've arrested him again. That's all got to go across to a CPS lawyer. It's a huge amount of work. And on that day, I personally remember trying to get, when we were looking to arrest him, staying up until very early hours of the evening at home, relaying information from covert sources to another covert source in order to find this gentleman and have him arrested. It was a very, I would say, very interesting and rewarding case to be working on, but certainly the next day I was knackered. I won't lie.
I'm not surprised. Because it's a huge, like you say, it's a huge investment of time, of energy, of mental energy. And I guess from what we were talking about a moment ago in terms of the impact on yourself and your team, I would presume that actually within your team there is a really, really strong resolve that yes, these things that we have to see are horrendous. They are horrible, but actually the work that you do is so important, and the positive impact, the direct impact that it can have when you catch somebody, when you take them off the street, when you get them offline, and they face those consequences, and not just about the arrest there, but also the children that have been impacted by this as well, or future children that may be impacted by it. I presume there's a really strong resolve. And
absolutely. Everyone on that team is there for a reason, and they know what that reason is. And they are, I credit to them again, the officers on that team. I can't say enough that any of the work that I do just wouldn't be possible without their dedication and their drive, their willingness to sacrifice family life, personal objectives, things that they want to do at home. When we get some information to, and I say, oh guys, it's going to be a 4:00 start tomorrow because of this, and this reason, there's no one in there that would say, I can't make it tomorrow, can't do it, don't want to come in at 4:00 in the morning. They all know that they're coming in at 4:00 in the morning, and they plan and prepare for it because that's the level of dedication that there is on that team. And we're doing it for a good cause. And Ben's offender, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison at the end of it, and he deserves it as far as I'm concerned. And with the things that he was saying, I'm relatively satisfied that we have stopped the abuse of children globally in the Philippines and at home. We've potentially stopped people becoming victims here of contact offences, and as the CPS barrister put it to us, probably that potentially being something very serious harm to a child in the future, possibly even worse than that.
Absolutely.
And it's a great satisfaction to take someone like that and see them go through the court process.
Fantastic. It's really good to hear. And yeah, thank you again to you and your team and Ben in particular for that in that instance.
Not just Ben, don't inflate his ego that much.
Maybe not too much, but, and everybody else in the team if the rest of the team are listening as well.
Yeah.
But because I know that's not isolated. I know when we first talked initially about doing this recording, I know at that point you were saying, actually I've got a really good case we could talk about as well. And so, I know there are some really positive outcomes from these things.
Yeah, we're getting better at it.
It's good.
As good as the criminals are out there are getting, we're also getting better as well.
Yeah. With that example and others, I'm sure, do you have kind of international links as well? So obviously in this instance, the physical abuse was taking place in another country. And do you have that ability to be able to kind of link in with other countries to sort of say, right, we need to notify of this, here's the evidence we've been able to glean?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with a lot of law enforcement agencies abroad and various other reporting mechanisms abroad in order to identify and safeguard children in other countries as well. And, we do get a lot of cooperation from our Western counterparts in the US and Canada and Europe as well. And we go through Interpol and the international desk to send out referrals to them if we need to. Not so much in the more eastern bloc of the world, like the Asian countries where we know that there's a high risk of harm of this nature from that kind of organized criminal activity. And it sort of comes along with perhaps the more vulnerable children who are less well off and live in poverty in those areas and are more vulnerable to exploitation by adults. We don't see a huge amount of cooperation from them, but it is getting better. It is getting better every day. And I think as more countries become alive to the horrors of what's going on, they will seek to cooperate with us more.
We will keep going on.
Yes.
So just to sort of round off, if somebody has a concern, and you said sometimes parents come to you to say, I've found this on the device, or what sort of information, evidence, intelligence, what sort of stuff is particularly helpful to you and your team? And I guess conversely, sort of, is there anything that's really not helpful for you?
So the useful information for us is always going to be if you're concerned about somebody else who's communicating with your child online, then it's always going to be usernames, emails, anything that links to that person that perhaps gives us an idea of who they are on the platform first, because then we can ask that platform for more information about that person and their accounts like that. So any information about sort of like who they're appearing as, what their names are, and in terms of like websites with concerning material on, then it's going to be like the URL for the website, which is like the www. Bits and pieces there. And the more information you can get saved on that phone, I suppose, about that person. So, for example, some applications like Snapchat and WhatsApp will have messages that will be automatically deleted after a certain period. You can turn that function off if you want to, and you can keep it there on the phone until we have a chance to get to it. And, don't dispose of the device either if you've got concerning material on there. we can come and get that device from you, and we can do what we need to do forensically on the device to record that information in that period of time and secure it ourselves. So some people, yes, because we do take quite a while to get round to these reports when they're filtered down from us, because it goes to a certain agency, who goes to another agency, who goes to us in the end, and it does take some time. Sometimes they'll be encouraged to just, I haven't heard anything in a couple of months, so I'll delete this, throw the phone away, trade it in, whatever, and then it's gone for good. But actually, no, if you keep hold of that phone, we can do our work with it, and we can get the information we need from it. I don't encourage anybody to take photos of indecent images of children and send them to us,
right?
Because that's not what we want, and it creates havoc for us on our computers. Because of course, my officers open up an email and there's that in there. They're like, "Oh my god, I have to send my computer off to be disposed of now, because once the data's on there, they can't get rid of it." And of course, if you're taking a picture of an indecent image of a child, even if it's being done with the best of intentions, you leave yourself liable to having your devices taken off you as well, because it has illegal content on there, and you might lose it. And just be very careful.
I have heard of both of those examples, actually. Somebody gave me an example fairly recently about, I think it was a dad became aware that his daughter had been sent a whole load of images and things, and he hit the roof, and his immediate response was, right, I've got a factory reset. I'm going to factory reset your phone and get rid of all of it. And then reported it to the police. Yeah. But like you say, by the time it comes through, it had all been wiped and there was nothing there. But also I've heard of sometimes people going, well, I've got these images. Okay, I need to email these to the police because they've got to have these. But
no, please no.
So just to be clear. So what is the best response then? To contact the police?
The best response is, in the first instance, to report the user or the content, if you can, to the social media website. And that will enable the social media website to take the actions that they need to safeguard, record that information on their systems, and to generate a report to us. Alternatively, there is a little known website which I think should be really blown up across the UK as a way of reporting this, called CEOP, which is CEOP. And that is the NCA's website, the Child Exploitation Online. That's the place where you should go to, because it has a lot of helpful tools on there to enable you to be educated about when you can be concerned about online behavior, how to talk to your children about online sexual behavior and what is and isn't appropriate in a relationship. And it also has on there a report function. And the CEOP platform is where we get most of our referrals from social media companies and things like that. So we live off of those referrals that come through to us, and they do come through to us quite fast. And the great thing about CEOP is that it's not just for companies to report concerning content on their platform. People can go on there and they can make a report online and give as much information as they can through the computer. They don't have to talk to an officer or anything like that. Or, if they're concerned about perhaps something's on the borderline and they're not really sure if it's a crime, things like that, they can send it off to CEOP. The NCA will have a look at it. And if they need to refer it to us, that we will, and then we will get in contact with you. And of course, there's always the usual channels of 101, 999, and popping into a police station as well to report your concerns. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, and we can take some proactive action. But for people who perhaps want to take that first step, or perhaps who are a professional, in sort of like a doctor's office or in the council, or a teacher who is not quite sure what they should do with that information, or they're a little bit concerned about a child who might be quite vulnerable to that exploitation, CEOP is a great resource where they can make reports that will come through to us. ICAT, unfortunately, does not have a public-facing, inquiry desk for people to just come and talk to us in. We're a small unit at the back of a dusty room that people might walk past and hopefully don't notice. But the easiest way to get hold of us is to make those reports that way. And there's tons of advice on the CEOP. And
I was going to say they've got I think resources.
Yes,
for working with young people.
Yeah. And then there's also Stop It Now as well, who have loads of advice on there about how to get in touch and report things, and also to support people who are going through perhaps things that are more serious online.
Brilliant. Well, what I'll do, I'll post the links for those into the description of this episode as well, so people can just click on that and get through to those websites. I say that there are some really useful websites out there around
absolutely
knowing what to do and how to support this really difficult area. Harvey, thank you so much again to not just for coming in today, but as I mentioned today, to you and your team for the work that you do. And say, incredibly difficult work, but incredibly important work. So.
Absolutely, and the team really do deserve the credit. It's definitely not me. It's them. No, I just manage things.
and just for clarity, Ben's all right, but he's just as good as all the rest of them.
Absolutely. Don't let his ego get too big.
Great stuff. Well, Harvey, thank you so much for coming in, talking to us, and it's been really, really fascinating and really enlightening to the work that you do.
It's been the first podcast I've ever had to do in my life ever, so I'm just pleased to be here and have a go at this.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, and take care of yourself. And it'll be great to potentially sort of talk to you again at some point in the future about some of the other work that you're doing.
Brilliant.
Harvey, take care.
Thank you.
As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in this episode's description. If you enjoy listening to the ThePPod, we'd really appreciate it if you took that time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review and let other people know about it. And make sure to let your colleagues know about this podcast and encourage them to join us here as well. It really does help to spread the word. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us here at ThePPod at somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guest today, Detective Sargent Harvey Ahern from the Internet Child Abuse team. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.